Hello, you're watching Uganda Sport with me, Pimer Beatrice. Thank you so much for choosing us today. We have Ochieno, Mr. Ochieno Joseph. You're welcome to the show.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me here. As I understand it, this is your inaugural show.
Yes, it is.
You look absolutely amazing.
Oh,
absolutely fantastic.
thank you.
I have known you in different programs, but I've not seen this energy as much as you present in this introduction. So I'm delighted to be here, and I'm also delighted to be your first guest. And I must also say that I'm delighted that you've opted to launch a program like this that looks at our history, looks at how we've been in between that to where we are today, possibly hoping that we shall then be able to have opportunities with your various guests to discuss contemporary Uganda. But I think what most excites me is the fact that you're absolutely beautiful and young, and that we hope that most of your audience are going to be predominantly young, beautiful people who are massively interested in building foundation for their future.
Right.
And so then I hope that your program will build on a possibility for the future, but looking at the back in terms of where we came from and how we arrived where we are, in which case then where and how do we go into the future. So I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. That was a beautiful compliment. Mr. Ochieno, in 1960, during the formation of Uganda People's Congress, where were you? Yes, sir.
I was still being planned.
It can't be true.
I was still being planned. And actually, amazingly, many people think, until possibly they meet me and they realize that I'm also relatively handsome and not particularly young.
Yeah.
Many people think that I was a minister in Obote 2 government, or said I was part of government. No, I was a secondary school student. And in Obote 1, no, I was a toddler.
Okay.
And I joined primary school during the means time. So no, I hadn't yet been founded and established, but I was of a fantastic family. I was being planned for as the last born in my family of 5 in Agongere of Eastern Uganda.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that means I can guess when you were born.
Roughly.
Somehow.
Sort of roughly close to an independence child. So that is fantastic.
Oh, wow.
That's why, in a way, I take the Republic very seriously.
But at least being part of this party as UPC, as an icon in the UPC, you've heard of people have mixed reactions of the UPC 1952 under Ignatius Musazi, then we have the UPC of 1960 under Dr. Milton Obote. Can you tell us the relationship between the two?
You know, Beatrice, you're absolutely right putting it in that way. Education is a fantastically good thing. And I'm talking about academic education. But education also as learning to uplift and improve on ourselves and engage in critical thinking is very good. But education in terms of our education from our parents and our communities, and so therefore history, is exceedingly important. And that is why it's so surprising that I must say that I was also delighted. You were such a prayer warrior, I didn't know. So that as we starting this program, we prayed, and that we invoke the name of Jesus, who lived over 2,000 years ago when we're not there. So people sometimes wonder, it's really about our decision to know the contextual historical truth. And so if you asked at independence, I wasn't there, I'm reasonably confident that I understand what happened around independence as well as anybody else around town. So that is 1960 true. But Obote and Musazi obviously was our founding president in 1952 as Uganda National Congress. Ignatius Musazi, a man born and bred in Luwero, a Buganda guy, was amongst the many trade unionists, was amongst the many people who were involved in trade union movements, were amongst the few conscious young Buganda and Ugandans, but particularly in Buganda, people were conscious about living in Uganda and Buganda, which was controlled by the British. And as conscious Africans, we were pushing towards questioning, particularly what happened around the world after the Second World War, and many Ugandans and other people going to fight on behalf of the empire. People began to realize that whether they're from India, from Sri Lanka, or from in this case, maybe Nigeria, they're fighting for a British empire, and yet they owned these countries. So particularly in the late 40s and then early 50s, the push for independence became real. The realization that, look, we are Ugandans, but this coffee belongs to us, but we don't seem to be getting the net benefit of its tax profits. I mean, indeed, particularly from exports, and that we export this cotton, but it's a privileged British who are in charge of this republic at Entebbe State House. Not fair. And for a section of Ugandans in Buganda, particularly Baganda in Buganda, asking that, look, the British are established in Entebbe, they control the entire Uganda as we know. They control Buganda, but in Buganda there is a layer of leadership under the Kabaka, and that layer of leadership was predominantly Protestant, privileged, but even then it's a monarchy, and where are we ordinary citizens? And so from the Bataka party came the movements of Africans waking up to realize that, look, we produce coffee, but we also want to be part of the conversation about how much I get for my kilogram of coffee, including possibly where this coffee is sold and to whom I sell to, whether you're black, white, or Asian. That demand is a constant. The only issue then you come to realize is that people play privilege from Mzungu. In fact, you don't find a Mzungu in the outskirts of anywhere in Kampala, jobless. Nor will you find an Asian. These days, Chinese are in charge of the drainage system in Kampala, and wonder where our Indian engineers are. That is where the Musazis, giving you a long background, and others, and then the Obotes said, look, we must push this movement towards a political party. Now, our friends in the global north, particularly the British Labour Party, the left-leaning people there said, look, empire is bad, meaning we, the British colonialists, go and conquer, like you see the Donald Trumps conquering Middle East for oil and others. We can't conquer other places, break them, kill them, usurp their wealth. That is ideologically wrong. That is imperialism. That is excess capitalism. Now, for those of us in the progressive left, in the Labour Party, in any case, how did we go ahead and practice slave trade? How did we then go ahead and all of a sudden Britain owns a British East Africa company, and East Africa is a property of some Queen of England?
Yeah.
And we, the British, not in our name, Beatrice, get me, not in our names. So progressive white British people said, no, we need to let go. That's why, up to and including apartheid in South Africa, many white British and others, global north, let me stick to Britain, we're saying no to apartheid. So people like one Lord Fina Brockway, I was lucky to have spoken on his behalf while elsewhere, long time ago, worked with the Uganda National Congress activists and persuaded and encouraged us and supported us in the founding of Uganda National Congress as a political party. So once we founded in 1952 as a coherent progressive left political party, the push for turning around all these grievances refocuses into national identity, refocuses into the issues that an average citizen of any modern nation state would think about. This is very important for your viewers, and particularly young viewers who may take sovereignty for granted, and particularly those people in power today, some of whom think they want to own the republic. They need to know the context of our history. So when this happened, Uganda National Congress very quickly, as the now official political voice in the Republic of Uganda, begins to push for campaign for our independence. These guys, now politically conscious, recognize, look, at the top, a privileged British in charge of Entebbe, they're ruling us, not even governing us. In the next tier, Asians, massively privileged, control the commercial realities of Uganda. And we, the Africans, you'll just be lucky to be an administrator in the government department. Say, no, we want independence now, self-rule. So Uganda National Congress then leads the process. Obviously, in 1960, 2 years later, for reasons that I can discuss later, is DP then gets founded for slightly different reasons. But I think let me stick to UPC. So fast forward, by 1958, we had, together now with DP, had sufficient campaigns to push the British colonial authority that our internal parliament in Uganda, the Legislative Assembly, should have African representatives. Can you imagine?
So who was pioneering that?
This is now led by Musazi and others. Yes, so basically Uganda National Congress as the leading political organization. But by 1958, the Africans organized under Uganda National Congress and Democratic Party later had managed to push the colonial British administration to say, you cannot have a parliament in Uganda in which Africans are not there. So our Legislative Assembly, again for your viewers, need to know that we had a parliament in this country which was a parliament of whites, British, and Asians. So the African was not worthy enough.
So when you talk about that is 1958, was that the period when still Dr. Milton Obote was the Prime Minister?
No, Obote wasn't yet. And I come to 58 because in 1958, for the first time, there was an elected Legislative Assembly, the first elected parliament in which Africans were allowed to participate. You see, now Obote joins parliament in 1958, called LegCo. Now, Obote, who had been quite active in related campaigns in Kenya with the Jaramogis and the Jaramogi Odingas and the Kenyattas and Tom Mboyas, comes back, part of Uganda National Congress campaign. In 1958, he joins parliament.
And before he was studying in Kenya and doing military stuff there?
No, it was not military. It was basically civic advocacy. Part of KANU, the then ruling party of Kenya, the party that became the ruling party of Kenya, but they're basically doing the advocacy, the kind of thing Uganda National Congress was doing here. But he had gone to Kenya to work. But they were doing activism because the situation was the same in Kenya and Tanzania and most of the African countries. So these were conscious young Africans wherever they were. They simply said, no, we need to organize as communities and we need to be organized in a politically conscious way in which we demand for our rights as Africans, whether it's in Kenya and Uganda. So in 1958, very importantly, Obote joins the Legislative Assembly. Musazi is still our president. So when Obote joins LegCo, as they call it in short, 1958, he becomes the star.
The star from Kenya?
No, the star in the parliament.
The parliament.
So, are we together? So when the Legislative Assembly was first elected, where Africans came in, many people came in, but Obote became the shining face of that. So that's when people got to know that we're this sharp young man. So today's parliament, I don't know whom I can use as an example. I don't want to give credit to too many people. But to be fair, once upon a time, people like Norbert Mao, those days, were seen to be ministers in parliament, things like that. So in 1959, unfortunately for Ignatius Musazi, contradictions in UPC, in UNC happens, and Musazi is expelled by the Delegates Conference. And after the expulsion of Musazi, the Delegates Conference elects Milton Obote as president in absentia. So Obote becomes the president of Uganda National Congress in 1959. Quickly, which is an important message for our contemporary viewers, these guys were able to seek to reunite the party. So in 1960, Uganda National Congress with Uganda People's Union, breakaway political organization, reunited and became Uganda People's Congress in March 1960.
So it was a joint.
Yeah, you can call it joint, but you can see the emphasis, since you focus on Obote, the president, being able to seek to reunite the conflicting parties, and then found Uganda People's Congress in 1960, and then focus now on in a united way, the push for independence. And that is why from 1960, by 61, we had gone to the Lancaster House Agreement, Lancaster House, to discuss our constitution and independence, and by 1960 we were independent. Yeah.
You've talked about the Buganda, the Ignatius Musazi and all that, and the economy of Uganda then. It reminds me of the heart of Obote. Obote then, like you said, when he joined the two parties, he was as well very passionate about Uganda's economy. And so being a leader, especially for those from the north, the Langis and the Acholi, he was very passionate and he wanted to lead them more along that line so they can probably, profit, make Uganda a profitable place to live in. Now, it brings back a picture of another individual, that is Kabaka Mutesa II and his party, that I want to believe this party, the Kabaka Yeka, played a very great role in Obote's coming back to power, or assuming of power. I wanted you to probably briefly take us through what happened in there between the Obote's UPC and also the Kabaka Yeka of Kabaka Mutesa II. You could shed more light on that. What existed between these two?
Yeah. I'll correct you on one thing. Obote of the 50s, Obote of the 60s, Obote of the 70s, Obote of the 80s, and Obote of the 90s. In fact, Obote of 2005, whom I met a few months before his death, was not Obote the Langi, nor was he Obote the Luo or Obote of the North. But he was extremely passionate about it. Interestingly, as we're now discussing leadership crisis in UPC, I was looking at some literature, which I think I even have some in my car. One of the letters of attempted reconciliation when there was issues with Cecilia Gwal, Museveni, and others on the question of whether or not we should participate in elections, in the NR election when parties were banned. And Obote wrote that, look, I'm not a tribal chief of Lango. I'm president of Uganda People's Congress, and I was former president of the Republic of Uganda. At no time in all this was the focus about identity. In fact, you realize that when I was giving the introduction, which is as it should be, Uganda National Congress, for example, was, even in the initial stages before Obote became the leader, was not a Buganda political party. It was a political party founded in Buganda, led by a Buganda, Ignatius Musazi, but it was a nationalist political party. What brings parties together is the depth of ideology. As I said, the values of Uganda National Congress, if it was centered around the well-being of an average African, access to health, access to education, access to jobs, access to opportunities for young people, rights and fairness for women, national sovereignty and independence. That is something which cross-cuts communities and their identities. And in fact, it has been suggested that whether in Obote 1 or Obote 2, in Obote 1, the most influential and the biggest number of ministers in his government were Buganda. Not because of the deal with KY, not necessarily, In Obote 2, the biggest number of ministers and most influential people in Obote's government were Banyankole, Westerners.
Why the shift?
No, because he was not a tribalist. And I'm lucky that I'm young but old enough to have had the opportunity to be with him.
Okay.
The guy said, Joe, I'm liberated from tribes and I'm liberated from religion. Obote would say that all the time. The people who were nearest to have taken over from him were Rugunda, Muchiga, were Mutebile, Muchiga, Lula Zakirunda, Musoga, the Chris Rakasisi, Munyankole, Moses Apiliga, Madi, Bito Volaro Tundu, that's the nearest Lua, Nechole, Bito Tai, and all, Teso. I can go on and on and on, and you really don't see a close lewdness, let alone anything long. So that was it. But partly we know that while you deliver, including Ochieno, the Japadola as a president of Uganda, post-Congress president of this country, you deliver for all the peoples of the Republic of Uganda. I was just having a conversation 2 days ago with a friend of mine, actually a presidential candidate, and I was trying to, I hope I was teaching, I was trying to have a conversation about how we should do things. And I was reminding this person that, Obote too, for instance, when UPC won only one seat in Buganda, the point you're trying to make, Buganda had vice president, the most powerful vice president. Since Paul Muwanga, there's never been a vice president in Uganda. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
There's never, people feel those positions, there's never been real vice presidents. Minister of Defense, since Paul Muwanga, this country has never had a Minister of Defense. They've got people who fill those positions. And Minister of Agriculture, Samir Mugisa. Agriculture is the most important economic docket in this country. And those fill Buganda. And then finally, head of national security, intelligence, Kasenda Dumba, Muganda. So this is the Uganda that you guys should be seeking, that I hope your program should be looking for to take to the future.
But Mr. Ochieno,
yeah.
When you talk about Dr. Milton Obote being a person to unite the different regions and all that, he didn't have any side to take.
No.
Where then, along the way, where does the conflict between the people from the north and the people in the western, or people in the central, where does the conflict come from?
It's pushed by chauvinists, predominantly from those other spaces, chauvinists from the center, chauvinists from the west, not Obote of the north.
Okay.
Number two, these are engines of Western imperialism and in many cases Western media. That's why I really hope that this program of yours succeeds as an alternative African voice, as an alternative Ugandan voice, and as a genuine, open and objective voice where people are able to come to this space and talk to you truth to power with evidence. So if you go into the details and depth, you realize that all these were froth, yeah, pushed by forces that hated Uganda's united independence for their interests, backed by Western media and interests for our instability. And when you get backed by media, you're a media personality, you know what it is. Propaganda is terrible, and particularly propaganda before the 24-hour television. You print one line on a newspaper and nobody gets the right to reply. That becomes presented as truth. That said, I'll go further. You'd asked about Obote and Sir Edward. From 1961, as we're preparing for independence, a relationship was built between Sir Edward, who was the king of Uganda, young king of Uganda, and Milton Obote, a young president of Uganda People's Congress. Of course, then there is Ben Chiwanuka, a young leader of the Democratic Party, briefly chief minister. And they're leaders of other kingdoms. In Busoga, we had Nadiope, Sir William Nadiope, who was also vice president of UPC at the time, but a king of Busoga. And you'll have leaders from the other kingdoms in Bunyoro, Toro, and other Republican communities like in West Nile and my Eastern Uganda. So these are leaders coming together. At the push for independence, up to the Lancaster House meeting in London, the issue then was about our independence. But Buganda had our interest. Buganda wanted to continue locking votes. This I say emphatically, locking votes. Buganda did not want an open, universal adult suffrage.